The grandmother's silent revolution. Have you ever been pushed so far by your own family that you decided to completely disappear from their lives? What would you do if the people you loved most made you feel invisible in your own existence? What you're about to hear will shock you. Are you ready? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. My name is Dorothy Mae Williams. I'm 71 years old, and I'm about to tell you the most shocking story of how I got the ultimate revenge on my family, who treated me like an embarrassing relic from the past. What I did next will leave you absolutely speechless. For 43 years, I lived in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, in the same ranch-style house where I raised my 3 children. After my husband Earl passed away from a heart attack 5 years ago, that house became both my sanctuary and my prison. My children, Robert, Susan, and Patricia, would visit occasionally, but something had changed in the way they looked at me. It started with small things that I tried to ignore. When I wore my favorite lavender cardigan to my granddaughter's graduation, I noticed the way Susan rolled her eyes at Patricia. When I pulled out my worn leather purse at the restaurant, Robert made that face, the one that screamed embarrassment without saying a word. But I convinced myself it was all in my head. After all, these were my children, the same babies I had nursed through midnight fevers and held during thunderstorms. The wake-up call came during Thanksgiving dinner last year. I had spent 3 days preparing everyone's favorite dishes in my outdated kitchen, using the same recipes that had been family traditions for decades. I wore my best dress, a floral print I had bought for Earl's funeral, and felt proud of the feast I had prepared. But the moment I walked into Susan's perfectly decorated dining room, I felt the chill. The other guests, neighbors, in-laws, family friends, all looked so polished, so modern, and there I was, looking like I had stepped out of a 1980s family portrait. During dinner, I tried to share memories about past Thanksgivings, stories about when the kids were little, but every time I spoke, conversations would somehow shift away from me. When I mentioned how Earl used to carve the turkey, Susan quickly changed the subject to her new kitchen renovation. The real moment of truth came when I excused myself to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, I heard voices from the kitchen, my own children's voices, talking about me like I wasn't even human. She really needs to update her wardrobe, Patricia was saying with a laugh. I mean, that dress looks like something from a thrift store clearance rack. And that purse, Susan added. I've offered to take her shopping so many times, but she's so stubborn. It's honestly embarrassing when we go places together. Robert's voice was the one that cut deepest. Mom's just stuck in the past. She doesn't realize how she comes across to other people. At the bank the other day, I could see people staring at her like she was some kind of museum exhibit. They were laughing. My own children were laughing about how embarrassing their mother was. I stood frozen in that hallway, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. These weren't strangers mocking me. These were the people I had sacrificed everything for. I had worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for their college educations. I had gone without new clothes, without vacations, without anything for myself, so they could have better lives. And this was how they repaid me, by treating me like a shameful secret they had to endure. I returned to the dinner table and finished the meal in silence. Nobody noticed that I had stopped talking. Nobody asked if I was okay. I was already invisible to them. That night, I went home and sat in Earl's old recliner, staring at photo albums filled with memories of raising those ungrateful children. But instead of crying, I felt something else building inside me, a cold, calculated anger that would change everything. The next morning, I made the first phone call that would set my plan in motion. I called my attorney, James Mitchell, who had handled Earl's will. "James," I said calmly, "I need to make some changes to my estate planning, and I need to do it quietly. Within a week, I have restructured everything: the house, my savings account, my life insurance policy. Everything was being transferred into a trust with very specific conditions. My children thought they would inherit my modest fortune when I died. They had no idea that fortune was about to disappear. But the house was just the beginning of my revenge. I spent the next month methodically planning my complete disappearance from their lives. I researched senior living communities, not because I needed care, but because I wanted a fresh start somewhere my children would never think to look for me. I found a beautiful independent living facility in Asheville, North Carolina, 800 miles away from Denver. It wasn't cheap, but I had been saving money for decades. The apartment was modern, elegant, and best of all, it came with a community of people who wouldn't judge me for wearing comfortable clothes or carrying a practical purse. The hardest part was keeping my plan secret while watching my children continue to treat me like an embarrassment. At Patricia's birthday party, I overheard my own granddaughter telling her friends that I was kinda weird because I didn't know how to use Instagram. Robert introduced me to his new girlfriend as my mom who lives in the past. Each insult, each dismissive comment, each eye roll just strengthened my resolve. 2 weeks before Christmas, I put the final phase of my plan into action. I had hired a moving company to pack up my belongings while my children were at work. Everything I wanted to keep fit into a small truck. My photo albums, Earl's watch, my mother's china, and a few pieces of furniture that held real sentimental value. Everything else, the house, the furniture my children expected to inherit, all of it was being donated to charity. But I saved the best surprise for last. On Christmas Eve, instead of the usual family dinner at Susan's house, my children each received a certified letter delivered by courier. Inside was a simple message typed on my lawyer's letterhead. Dorothy Mae Williams has decided to relocate and begin a new chapter of her life. The family home has been sold, and all proceeds have been donated to various charities. Mrs. Williams wishes you all the best in your future endeavors. Please do not attempt to contact her, as she desires complete privacy during this transition. I can only imagine their faces when they read those words: shock, confusion, anger. Probably all of it at once. But the real bombshell was in the second paragraph. The letter explained that the trust containing their inheritance had been dissolved, and those funds had also been donated to charity. After a lifetime of planning to inherit their mother's money, they were left with nothing. I was already settled in my new apartment in North Carolina when the frantic phone calls started. My old number had been disconnected. Of course, they tried contacting my lawyer, but he was under strict instructions to provide no information about my whereabouts. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. My new community was everything I had hoped for. The people here didn't care that I wore comfortable shoes or that my purse was practical. Rather than fashionable, we played cards, took day trips to the mountains, and had actual conversations about books, current events, and life experiences. I made friends with Eleanor, a retired teacher who shared my love of mystery novels. There was Frank, a widower who taught me to play chess. Margaret, a former social worker who had also been estranged from her adult children. For the first time in years, I felt seen and valued as a person, not just tolerated as someone's aging mother. 3 months into my new life, I received a letter that had been forwarded through my lawyer. It was from Susan, and it was everything I expected. Part apology, part accusation, part desperate plea for me to stop this nonsense and come home. She wrote about how worried they all were, how they had hired a private investigator to try to find me. She claimed they never meant to hurt my feelings and that they loved me despite my quirks. The letter was filled with guilt trips about missing family gatherings and how the grandchildren were asking about me. But nowhere in that letter did she acknowledge the real reason I had left. There was no recognition of how they had treated me. No understanding of the humiliation they had put me through. It was all about their discomfort, their inconvenience, their loss. I threw the letter away without responding. 6 months later, another letter arrived, this time from Robert. His tone was different, angrier. He accused me of being selfish and dramatic. He wrote about how I had destroyed the family and how my actions had hurt the grandchildren. He demanded to know where I was and threatened to involve the police if I didn't contact them immediately. Again, I threw the letter away. Their inability to understand why I had left only confirmed that I had made the right decision. A year passed in my new life, and I had never been happier. I had joined a book club, started taking watercolor painting classes, and even began volunteering at the local animal shelter. I woke up each morning excited about the day ahead instead of dreading family interactions. That made me feel inadequate. But the most surprising development came when I least expected it. I was at the grocery store when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Excuse me, are you Dorothy Williams?" I turned around to see a young woman in her 20s with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. It took me a moment to recognize her. It was Emma, Patricia's oldest daughter, my granddaughter. My first instinct was panic. Had they found me? Was this some kind of ambush? But Emma quickly raised her hands. "Please don't worry, Grandma. I'm not here to drag you back or cause any drama. I wanted to apologize." We sat in a quiet corner of the store's cafe, and Emma told me something that changed everything. She had overheard her parents and aunts and uncle talking about me after I disappeared. In their frustration and guilt, they had revealed things she had never known. They admitted to being embarrassed by me. They talked about how they had planned to put me in a nursing home after I became too much trouble. They discussed selling my house and splitting the proceeds while I was still alive, just moving me into a facility against my will. "I never knew they talked about you that way," Emma said with tears in her eyes. I always thought you were the coolest grandma ever. You taught me to bake cookies. You read me stories. You never made me feel stupid for asking questions. When you disappeared, I was devastated." She paused, wiping her eyes. "But now I understand why you left, and I don't blame you at all." Emma spent 3 hours with me that day, and for the first time in years, I felt connected to my family again. But it was different now. It was a connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation. She asked if she could visit me sometimes, and I said yes. But I made it clear that this was between us. I wasn't ready to rebuild relationships with her parents, and maybe I never would be. Over the next year, Emma visited me every few months. She was in college now, studying to become a social worker. Inspired partly by her own family's dysfunction, she told me about her life, her dreams, her relationships, and I shared stories about Earl, about raising her parents, about the woman I had been before I became just someone's embarrassing mother. Through Emma, I learned that my disappearance had indeed shattered my children's world. Robert and Susan's marriages were struggling under the stress of guilt and recrimination. Patricia had started seeing a therapist. They had all realized, too late, how much they had taken me for granted. But I felt no satisfaction in their suffering. I had moved beyond revenge into something much more powerful. Complete indifference to their approval or disapproval. The woman who had once desperately wanted her children to be proud of her was gone. In her place was someone who knew her own worth and didn't need anyone else's validation to feel valuable. 2 years after my disappearance, I received one final letter, this time from all 3 of my children together. It was different from the others, shorter, simpler, and more honest. They acknowledged that they had treated me poorly. They admitted their embarrassment and their mistakes. They asked, without demanding, if there was any possibility of rebuilding our relationship. For the first time, they seemed to understand that they had lost more than money when I left. They had lost the woman who had loved them unconditionally for their entire lives. I thought about that letter for weeks. Part of me wanted to maintain my silence forever, to let them live with the consequences of their choices. But another part of me, the part that had spent decades being a mother, wondered if forgiveness might be possible. In the end, I decided to send a simple reply. Respect is earned, not inherited. If you're ready to treat me as a person rather than a burden, we can start over. But it will be on my terms, in my space, when I'm ready. I never told them where I lived, but I gave them my lawyer's contact information. If they wanted to rebuild our relationship, they could prove it by respecting my boundaries. Some of them did reach out through proper channels, others didn't. And that told me everything I needed to know about who was genuinely sorry and who was just sorry they got caught. Today, I'm 73 years old and living my best life in the mountains of North Carolina. I have a small circle of true friends, a granddaughter who values my wisdom, and most importantly, I have my self-respect back. The woman who once apologized for existing has been replaced by someone who takes up space confidently and makes no excuses for who she is. So I have to ask you, when the people who are supposed to love you the most make you feel worthless, how far would you go to reclaim your dignity? Was what I did an act of justified self-preservation, or did I take things too far? Let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear what you would have done in my situation.